Hi, everyone. My name is Maris Kreisman, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you tonight to another excellent virtual event at McNally Jackson. If you go to mcnallyjackson.com and look at our events calendar, you'll see all the amazing writers and programs we're hosting in the coming weeks. Please keep an eye on the site or subscribe to our newsletter to hear more about what's coming soon. There will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for your questions, so start thinking about them now. You can use the Zoom chat function to submit any question you have, and we'll get to them towards the end of the evening. We're glad that even though we can't all be in the same room tonight, we're still able to host events during this difficult time. As we've weathered the pandemic and reopened all 4 of our locations for browsing and shopping, indie bookstores like ours still need more support. And so if you enjoy free events like this one and want us to keep posting more of them, please buy books from us. Throughout the evening, I'll be posting links in the chat to buy the American edition of Ridgerunner from McNally Jackson. And I'm so thrilled to welcome Gil Adamson here tonight, the author of Ridgerunner, which won the Writers Trust Fiction Prize and was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and was named a Best Book of the Year by the Globe and Mail and the CBC. And she is joining us from Toronto. And joining her tonight is Emily St. John Mandel, the author of 5 novels, most recently The Glass House and Station 11. She lives in New York City with her family. And then joining them is publicist and hostess extraordinaire, Lauren Sarand, and we're so happy to have her here too. And Jill, if you want to start reading a little bit from the book first, that would be amazing.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for being here. And Emily, thanks for being my host. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Me too. My pleasure.
This is a real thrill for me. But I guess a good thing is to sort of give you an idea of the book that we're going to talk about, which is my book Ridgerunner. And the reading will really only last about 3.5 minutes, but it'll give you an idea what it sounds like. 2 straight lines of identical miners' houses faced each other across the rail line, their shadows angled in the moonlight. William Moreland perched atop a hill to the south of all mining interest in St. Croix, Montana, and marveled at his old place of employ, how much it had changed in almost 3 decades. Last time he'd been here, he was in his 20s. Here was the same old head frame looming to the north, built right into the mountain. In the valley, he saw the same field where westbound trains turned in a wide arc and headed back east. But now there was a new metal slide below the mine head, held off the ground by sturdy trestles. His old bunkhouse was gone. All the bunkhouses were gone, replaced by dozens of evenly spaced homes, each with a pitched roof, glazed windows, and its own discreet outhouse. Some even showed signs of children being present. Where had it been, his bunkhouse? He recognized the main entrance he used to walk into each evening, the rail line exactly where it had always been, but everything else seemed skewed by change, jumbled together, smaller, in the wrong place. He moved laterally around the west margin of the mine and up the north slope so he was behind the head frame. There, he clambered down the rocks till he found a low overhang that allowed him to lie comfortably on his belly and gaze down at the Toplanders' deck, or this mine's version of it, and beside that a kind of boxy office built for the bosses and accountants. This wooden building was cantilevered out over the slope so they could see most of the yard, the rail line, the tipple, the coke ovens, everything. Years ago, this was where they kept the money, and as far as he could tell, the building was unchanged from days past. How often he'd gazed up at it on his way into the mine entrance and seen figures up there, moving through the lamplight. Now he was looking down on it. The office was dark and showed no signs of movement. He rested his chin on the cold rock and waited. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind, sighing through the scrub at his ears. His wife Mary's voice saying, "Get up, you've come this far." And finally he slithered belly down off his perch, dropped quietly to the deck, towed his knapsack into the shadows, and from there he spooked past a bank of windows until he found the oak door of the mine boss's office. Shocked to find nothing but slack on the handle, he He pushed the door inward with 2 fingers and stepped into the lightless room. Then Moreland simply stared. The safe was new. Like so many other things in St. Croix, no real point locking your office door when you had a hardware this good. The matte black box stood as high as Moreland's chest, and it had a thick brass handle and painted filigree around the combination dial. It stood rather daintily on kitten heels and had been positioned in the middle of a large square metal plate that the owners had brought in to distribute its massive weight over the floorboards, lest those kitten heels punch through the old wood. He approached it and saw a blur of scratches and dings around the entire circumference of the door where drunken miners had tried in vain to use their tools to pry it open. He shouldered his knapsack and allowed himself a deep, sob-like sigh. He hoped they still kept the dynamite where they used to.
Thank you so much for that reading. I wish I could say welcome to New York. And I like to imagine that there's some kind of I don't know, like parallel universe where we're sitting next to each other and McNally Jackson having this conversation face to face.
Oh, me
But
too. My
yeah,
goodness, me
yeah.
too.
But I'm glad we can at least do this.
Yes.
I wonder if you would introduce yourself a little bit and your body
Okay.
of work to anybody
Okay.
who might not be familiar in New York.
Good idea.
And what I'm particularly thinking about is the genesis of Ridgerunner. I remember you telling an amazing story about what first sparked the idea for this book.
Oh, good idea. Yes. Okay, so my name is Gil Adamson. I've got 2 volumes of poetry. I have Ashland and Primitive. I have to remember my own books. A book of short stories, linked short stories called Help Me, Jacques Cousteau. And that was me inching into fiction and trying to figure out as a poet whether I could even do it. And apparently I could, and I really enjoyed it. Loved really moving into fiction. And then one day I thought I would try to see if I could write a novel, because it may seem like pretty much anyone can write a novel, but it's sort of not true. Otherwise, everyone would have a novel, and that's just not the case. So you really never know when you set out to try a different form, whether you can manage it. So I thought I would use a poem from one of my poetry books as a kind of an outline. And the poem was called Mary. And it worked as a kind of point form biography of a very troubled woman. And very quickly I realized, yes, I like this. I like writing this. I don't want to stay with the poem for very long, so I abandoned it as as an outline. And the story took very long to write. It took me 10 years to write The Outlander, and to my surprise, people liked it, and it was just such a fun thing for me to write. I so enjoyed being in that world. It's about a young woman, and we find out on the first or second page that she has shot her husband and is being pursued by her brothers-in-law who want to exact vengeance. And she spends much of the book in motion, evading them. So that was really fun to write. And partway through the book, she meets a man, and they become an item. And I was at a book club, and I was reading. It was a rather large book club out in Alberta where the book was set. And I was reading, and we did an event, and then it was over, and people were dispersing and going off to other readings and things like that. And there was a woman sitting next to me from that book club who was kind of talking to herself. She was kind of worrying to herself because she really wondered what this couple would be like as parents. And she seemed quite worried, actually, about the outcome. And I understood that was a reasonable worry. But what happened in my head as I started to think, well, I know exactly what they'd be like as parents. It's not terribly bad news. But what kind of child would they produce? What kind of child would they nurture? How would they live as parents? And so really, this second book, Ridgerunner, came from an offhand, non-pointed question from a reader. And I don't think there's any better compliment to readers to say, you just gave me, again, took me a long time to write the book. You just gave me this very wonderful experience. I've had a fun time writing. So thank you.
And I love that it was genuine concern about fictional characters, like that
Yes,
spawned this book. Like she was really thinking this through.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. She was kind of sweating it. And I thought,
right.
well, I guess I did my job right.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this Ridgerunner, which I love, by the way, I think it's spectacular.
Well,
It
thank you
has
so much.
such an incredible sense of time and place in a way that historical fiction doesn't always. You know, and I mean this is the highest compliment when I say I forgot I was reading historical fiction. It's just, it's so immersive.
Oh, thank
And
you so much.
yeah, and I was really struck by something you said just now in relation to The Outlander, that you said two things. One is that it took you 10 years to write, and the other is that it was really fun. Is that,
Yes,
do you find a lot of joy in the research? Because I imagine it must be pretty intense.
I do. And I don't know if so many writers have different relationships to the actual writing process. I enjoy the writing process a lot more than I enjoy any of the other sort of elements. I really love the editing process though, too. That's fun for me. But that there's quite a bit of joy in being in my office and it's quiet. And really, I don't show my book to anybody except perhaps my husband. And even then it's usually quite far along by the time I let it out of my own privacy in my own hands. So I actually really enjoy that. Now, because this book, The Outlander was set in 1903, and so I did have to do some kind of odd research about what
Mhm.
life would have been like, especially for women. Um, in that was not terribly difficult. There are lots of books that are about that moment,
Mhm.
just post 1900, where everything was starting to change. So that was that kind of research was pleasurable as well. For this book, I really had to understand, at least in terms of Alberta, in terms of Canada, in terms of this particular time,
Mhm.
what was happening in the war, because it was World War I, and that is a very, very um, researched and stepped on and covered and talked about era.
Yeah.
So that was a bit nerve wracking because I had so much to take in, and I had to make sure that none of it that I was able to fold it organically into the characters' lives. Uh,
Right, right. Without getting into the blocks of exposition about, you know, candle making or whatever it was. Right.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, every now and then I had to do some weird research on things
Mhm.
like, can you see whether the gun is loaded in the dark? So I would, which particular
Right.
kind of gun it was. There's a point at which a child has a gun, and there were all these little things. had to do gun research, and that
Yeah.
was distressing for me anyway. It was just I've never really had a gun or held a gun really, but I needed to understand it, and I needed to kind of know what the characters were experiencing physically.
Right.
So that kind of research actually was great fun, and anything to do with horses, anything to do with, you know, the natural world, I could just disappear into that forever.
Right. Right.
Why would that not be a wonderful
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yeah. Except for the gun research, which
Yeah, the
freaks me
gun
out too.
research was
Whenever I have to do it, it's just like, God, no.
you feel this too.
Yeah. You know, I mean, we're both Canadian. Like it's
Yeah.
not, it's less of a gun culture and it could be jarring.
It can be
Yeah.
jarring, and you feel like you're sort of glad to be away from. You need the experts, and you need them to tell you. Like for instance, there is a gun in the book that is a lever action repeater.
Okay.
So for people who don't know what that is, and I didn't know what it really was, it's a gun that you move the trigger guard forward and backward, and that levers a shot into. There's a famous scene in True Grit, I'm pretty sure, where he's using a lever action repeater and swinging it. So I had to figure out how to swing cock a lever action repeater from exactly this decade,
Right.
and what it sounded like and what it felt like. And once I figured that out, I was happy to back out of the whole
The whole
that whole
firearms
world.
world. Right.
Yes,
There was some,
world.
there was a line toward the end of the book that really grabbed me that I wanted to ask you about. This is just like a sentence, but so it's a scene where I don't think this is much of a spoiler. A number of men are standing together in a clearing, all of them kind of, I don't know if you'd say they live off the land, but way off the grid, or it's, 1917 equivalent. These were men living outside of time, standing in a landscape unchanged since prehistory. And I love that idea of writing characters who live outside of time. It seems to me there's almost a weird parallel there with writing a book, isn't there? It's like when you write a novel, you're kind of outside of the world that you're writing about. And also,
Yeah,
frankly, outside of the world, you're in your office observing the world. I wondered
absolutely.
if you're drawn to characters like that generally, and if that idea resonates at all, that it's something like what writers are doing.
Oh yeah, definitely, because there's a certain freedom um, to being out of the quotidian worries of your life, or the sort of grinding detail of our lives. It's so freeing to be able to um, stop concentrating on that and just bring your focus in on something that you, let's face it, as a writer, have quite a bit of control over.
Yeah.
So in an odd way, it's like it's a bit like if you've ever had a memory of something that was difficult when you were younger, and you think about it, and in your brain it went a different way. It just goes a different
Yeah.
way because you're just sort of like rewriting it and making it work out a little better than it actually did. Well, there's a great sense of um, um, freedom to being able to control your character, and also having the time, because if it's not working, you go back and you fix it. If it's
Yeah.
not gelling, you go back and you fix it. And so there isn't this, there really isn't a deadline. I mean, perhaps for you and some writers, there are deadlines, and you will sort of struggle with that. And with this book, I did actually have a deadline that I didn't really. I don't think I'll do that again. I won't hand the book
Mhm.
over until I'm pretty much ready to let it go. But you're right. There is an element of kind of not being part of the normal world, because we're
Yeah.
not, as writers.
No, we're really not. And yeah, I'm the same as you. I really prefer one book deals for that reason. It's like I don't want a deadline that I have to think about. And yeah, so I
No.
very rarely have one either, and it works better for me.
Yeah, I think it's sort of I do know writers who almost require a deadline. Some poets, for instance, really thrive from being told you have to have it done by this time, and the anxiety, or not, maybe not anxiety, but the sort of the energy will
Right.
make them overproduce, and that you can get some
Interesting.
great stuff out of a panicking poet. You really
Yeah.
can.
I love that. Yeah. There's like some kind of cheap joke of the expensive poets about a longing for structure or something, but I'm not even going to get into.
You'll just go. Exactly,
But
exactly. So
yeah. But this kind of leads into something else that I'm really curious to hear from everybody, which is, how is your pandemic going? Like, as you were just talking about that sense of control,
yeah,
which I don't know about you, but that's been the opposite of my 2020, 2021 experience so
yeah.
far. And I've personally found fiction to be such a refuge during a time like this. I think because of what you talked about, that idea of this world that you actually have some control over.
Yeah, and the quotidian, as I say, the sort of the everyday and the grind of it, and the worry and the things you have to remember, and um, so many things have changed in the last year. We're almost at a year now. I think we are in the third lockdown. I'm in the third major lockdown, and the other day I was going. I've I've now spent the equivalent of 3 months in my house. And
Right.
I'm naturally a hermit, and I'm a writer, and I'm a freelancer. I've got elite skills for dealing with, claustrophobia. I really do. And I'm starting to go bonkers for sure. But, and again, you were talking about the three men standing in the wilderness, and that was one of the great things about writing this book, is that I continued to be able to remind myself how timeless things are. And this is something that will happen if you go to Banff, Alberta, or you go to any place in the Rockies, or any place in the world where we are a blip. Historically, we are a blip, and there's something affronting and upsetting about that, and there's also something very relieving about it. Just to think that the birds have been doing their morning chorus for millennia, and they're going to do it tomorrow, and no one knows why, and it's just very cool. it takes you out of, it's good for us to think about things other than our own tiny lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I like to start my day by looking at the COVID numbers from the day before. So, that is a nice antidote to
It is a
remember
nice
that.
antidote.
Yeah.
Especially if they're going down, it gets quite distressing when it's like, oh crap. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna end up in a, yeah, it's become a sort of a habit,
Hmm.
and then when you start to see them, see the numbers going down, you feel as if you're part of something that's good, right? We've got a goal.
Yeah.
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think you're right. And also, because my book is set where it is, I was also aware of the fact before any of this happened, that there was a previous pandemic, and that I wasn't going to include that in the span of my book.
Right.
And so there's a bit of a jump there. And part of it was, I didn't want to live through it.
No, no, who would? I mean,
Who did?
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you, so, I was reading about your writing life and from what you were just talking about with, is it fair to say at this point that you've gone from poetry to prose, or do you find yourself dipping back into that genre?
That's a funny thing. Because I do know a number of writers who started off as poets and then became novelists, like short story, but actual novelists. And none of us really ever give up the poet. We never give up. We never say we're done with poetry. There's something, it's almost like abandoning your childhood or abandoning your
Right.
child, right? It's like, no, I still have hope that I'm going to get back to this. But but also I find, and there may be people out there who write, several different forms. When I'm writing fiction, I have trouble apprehending poetry. It seems to be compacted in a way that I find hard to unpack. And when I'm reading and writing poetry, fiction just seems like a bunch of flabby blab.
Right. Right.
It's like, yeah, I figured out where you were going, and please get it done. It just seems like a lot of, I'm sounding critical, but in fact, what that is the writing brain focusing on how to create the utterance, what the utterance is going to be. And, lately, for some reason, I've just been having so much fun writing fiction.
Mhm.
I haven't really written very many poems.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a strange thing. I think I could never really give it up.
Right. That makes sense. Do you feel like, and I'm asking this out of curiosity because I'm totally intimidated by poetry. I've really never written it, and I don't know. I wasn't really interested in what you just said about finding it hard to read poems when you're really focused on long form prose.
Yeah.
Because I'm always focused on long form prose, which makes me think like maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's why I can never quite attach to a poem.
Yeah,
But
you have fiction brain.
I
You have
think I have,
fiction brain.
yeah, a permanent case of chronic fiction brain. But do you feel like for you it's a matter of being unable to tell the story you want to tell in prose, or it just feels like the wrong form for the moment?
It's a funny thing. It's almost as if, and this may have a lot to do with the way that I've written my last two books, the pressure that I put on the language. I am capable of writing a different style than this that really doesn't. I mean, I hate to use the word poetic language, but you know what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, like
I
Anne
get,
Michaels.
and yeah,
Right.
and Michael Ondaatje.
Right.
Right, Michael Ondaatje again is another poet who, it's pretty clear that he is using his poet brain while writing fiction as well. So in a strange way, we may not return to poetry, in part because it takes so long to write a book of fiction. It is
Right.
a big job.
Yeah.
But also we're getting our satisfaction, out of writing a book that's kind of heavy on style.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I
That.
mean, if you think about some of the, I'll recommend books that you guys already know. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which was also made into a film, and they were so loyal to the writing of Ron Hansen's writing that they actually took a lot of the language out of the book and put it into the film in order to create this atmosphere. And, he's an example of somebody whose language is very inspiring to someone who writes like I do.
Mhm.
And Desperados is another one. I love that. I love that book. So yeah, there's a way to get your poetic enjoyment, out of writing fiction.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense to me. And your prose has this wonderful kind of spare style, which I do associate with poetry. As I said, I'm not very conversant in the form, but yeah, maybe it's sort of just the opposite end of the language spectrum from the Anne Michaels and Michael Ondaatjes of the world. But there is a kind of distilled quality to it, which I associate with poetry, and which I have to say, and I mean this in a completely complimentary way, associate with books that took a long time to write. You just go over it again and again and again.
And again, and you have, like, I stumbled on you've got a scene where a man is looking at his wife, and he loves shipping. He's in the shipping world, and there's this gorgeous sort of gust of language that we're floating on the seas, and all these ships are points of light. And you do that whether you think you do or not. I was looking at, I was post-it noting and going, yep, this is what she does too.
Thank you.
This rocks.
Thanks.
So
Thank you. Yeah, just credit where credit's due. That was totally my UK editor, who's an editorial genius. Yeah, she had a little note in that section, and I don't remember what it was, but the section used to be much more kind of down to earth.
oh,
And her note was something to the effect of, could we have a moment about the sort of wonder and magic of the way he experiences this industry? And I was like, yes, I can do that.
well done. Well
Yeah.
done.
So that's a good editor for you.
That's an example of applying that kind of language toward a purpose. It's
Right.
important to the character. It's important to the book. It's important to what the book is about. And I had a similar experience with my editor who, there's a scene in the book where a character goes to visit the nun and he doesn't want to go there. That chapter would not have existed without my editor, not overstepping in any way, but going, what would be good.
Yeah.
and me
Just
going,
a suggestion, but
I know. And lots of editors would never do that. It depends on their style and all that stuff. But for me, it actually worked. And it was one of those exciting things where you go, I can work with that. I can do that.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious to know if it's the same with you. I find like just concrete notes like that are so valuable, because I always have this feeling like if I knew how to make it better, it would be better.
It would
So
already be
tell me
there.
how to fix it.
No.
I'll execute it.
Yeah, I agree. And in a sense, the editor allowing their creative, almost backseat writing. So few of them are actually writers themselves. So it is really an unusual skill that they have,
Absolutely.
but it is definitely creative. And I appreciate an editor that will float those kinds of, ideas and be okay with whether you take them or not.
Yeah.
There's just more to work with. It really
Yeah.
is. And it's somebody, engaging with a book that you put some effort into and worked hard on in a passionate way.
Yeah.
They're not just sort of
Absolutely.
eliding chapters and going, this is boring. They're excited about it and they're trying to come up with things that will make it even better.
Yeah.
Definitely worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my experience has been that at every bookstore event, and probably every event, and again, let's just pretend we're sitting in a bookstore.
Yes, please.
Yeah, God, I miss bookstores. um, I feel like at every event, there are a certain number of people who are, if not secret writers, just starting out as writers.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you'd talk a little bit in that spirit about your writing process. Like, how do you write a novel? Is this all completely mapped out in advance? Do you wing it a little bit and fill in the research later? Like, how does it work for you?
That's a good question. I might ask you the same question later, but you can just flip me the bird. It's okay, because for some people, it's a private thing. I'm not sure that I would recommend my method to everybody, because when I start the book, I have an understanding of where I want it to go or what the characters are like. But I really do write sequentially. And I really do. This may be why it takes me so long to write a book, because I will write it as if it's happening. And that means occasionally I will paint myself into a corner, and I'll have to go away for quite a long time and kind of think about it and go, so there's a solution to this, and I just need to wait for it to occur to me. And what I hope, at least, is that when you read the book, it actually does feel as organic as the writing. The writing was organic. I don't outline. I very rarely, I'll make a ton of notes, but there'll be turns of phrase. There'll be ideas for stuff that could happen, but there'll be 2 or 3 sentences. So I don't have some of those big binders that some writers have, and that is nurturing for them, and that helps support them. And what the way I write is I fling myself into it, almost literally. And quite often there will be this delightful surprise where, William Morland, the Ridgerunner himself, wasn't really supposed to be in the book, and he just happened. I'd been reading something that inspired me, and I just plopped him into the book, and then I had to get up from my desk and walk around my office, scratching my head and going, can I do that? Like, can I really do that? And of course you can. It was just, I surprised myself.
Right.
I don't know if that sounds like I've got everything under control, but I do. But
Yeah.
it's a controlled fall is what it is.
That makes sense to me. And I appreciate you saying that, because, every now and again you'll come across a writer who's like, I didn't realize that Mr. Smith had a gun in his pocket until he pulled it out. It's like, you're the writer. You made that happen. It's not that mysterious.
You knew it was going to happen, and you're totally in control. And I also don't subscribe to the notion that characters talk to you. I understand if that's what helps them write the book. But, there's a small cohort of writers who feel as if their characters are their friends, and that it's coming to them as some kind of thing from without. But in fact, we are in great control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I feel like those are the weird writers at the literary festival you don't really want to have lunch with, just generally speaking.
Exactly. There might be a vampire in their book, or
exactly.
Nothing wrong with vampire books.
No, I
Anne Hebert, a fellow Canadian, doesn't she have a really quite amazing book about vampires in the subway of Montreal? Anne Hebert.
Amazing. I haven't read it.
Oh, she's a good writer. Oh, she's great. And most of her books are novellas. They're just these beautiful little gems.
I love that link. Can you tell me her name again?
Anne Hebert, Hebert. Anne, I think, is with an E.
Okay.
Because French.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of what some of the titles would be. I don't know if Kevin's here, but
can't be.
Eloise, Heloise, and
thank you.
Yeah, Eloise, I think, is the one about, and there's another one, beautiful one called A Suit of Light, which is about a child, and it's really quite a gorgeous book. These funny things you stumble across, and you're not sure it's really going to be for you, and you just gobble it up.
Yeah, I feel like that's the sign of a really good book, where the genre just stops mattering. You're not thinking about it being about vampires. You're thinking about it being really good.
Totally, gobbling it up. I love it, actually. Every now and then, somebody will tell me, I really don't like Westerns. Like, that's not for me, but I really liked yours, which sort of
right.
I have this delightful feeling that they went in hostile and then came out, happy. That makes that, yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice feeling. And it's nice when they give it a shot. I've had kind of a similar situation with the sci-fi world, because my fourth novel was partly post-apocalyptic.
That's right.
I hate sci-fi, but I liked your book. Or conversely, I won't read your book because I don't like sci-fi. It's like, fine.
Like, I know.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. So Are
Yeah.
you a bit of a fan of sci-fi? Like, did you read it when you were a kid or anything like that?
Yeah, I read it constantly as a teenager. I feel like I was always reading about like androids and alien planets. Yeah, I've always been a fan, and I've gotten really into. I'm going to mispronounce his first name, and I apologize. Shishin Liu, I believe his name is. The Three Body Problem. I love
Oh,
his work. It's so good.
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I've been reading a lot of Chinese sci-fi lately, and I'm really enjoying it.
That's okay. We're gonna have to maybe do a
Yeah, we might have to do
cross
like a breakout room later.
pollination,
Yeah,
reading list. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Do you find yourself particularly drawn to westerns as a genre? Which, I realize the whole question of genre, as we've just covered, is kind of subjective and slippery. But is
Yeah.
there something about that form that speaks to you in particular?
Well, my husband introduced me to some of the great old Western movies, and I just took to them so much. I guess, w- again, Western writers are allowed to have a certain amount of style.
Hmm.
So if you like that kind of writing, you're going to be able to find them in Westerns, and I'm talking about literary Westerns.
Right.
So there's Louis L'Amour and there's things like that, but then there's some of the Cormac McCarthy books
Yeah.
and Ron Hansen, as I mentioned, and that kind of thing. Um, there's usually someone in the book who is entirely capable.
Hmm.
There's something kind of great about reading a book where at least someone is capable.
It's so refreshing, isn't it?
It's like
There's such ineptitude in literature.
it is, right, and it's a bit like seat of the pants or kittens running around on a freeway.
Right.
Right. And the stakes are usually pretty high. So if you think about, classic old thing like High Noon, he has a choice as to whether he's going to run away or he's going to stand up to them. So that makes you care about the outcome quite a bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, and also there's usually, not always, but usually Westerns have this sense of the outdoors, the frontier. So it is a very American. It's an American genre, um, but this sense of freedom that comes with responsibility and comes with peril.
Right.
So those kinds of things just keep you reading. And there's this whole. I remember reading a and really sorry. It was an American female academic, I think, who's specialized in the Western. You read these weird books. There's a book called Gunfire Nation, and you pour through it and don't remember a lot of it. But and she said, our interest in and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. Our interest in the frontier happened the moment the frontier disappeared. So you
That's
become,
fascinating.
I know, isn't that, it's very smart. And
Yeah.
so there's a nostalgia for something that you no longer have and possibly and never will have. So that's another thing about the Western is the sort of nostalgia for freedom.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of things. It's hard to put into words why a certain genre will attract you. I also I have read a little bit of sci-fi, and I'm not at
Hmm.
all. But there is something. For instance, there's a movie called Outland that is a Western in space. It's basically High Noon in space.
That's awesome.
I know, it's such a funny thing. And then there was a great old little TV show called Firefly that was again a Western in space. And I think sometimes these. So I'll tell you, I won a crime award, and that introduced me. I didn't think my book was a crime book, even though there's a hell of a lot of crime in it. But I thought of it as a literary Western. But that introduced me to a lot of crime writers.
Hmm.
And it is very clear that the cross-pollinization, genre used to be a dirty word when I was younger. And literary people wouldn't be caught dead. Allowing cross-pollinization, and that's completely different now. There's
Yeah.
a lot of healthy blurring going on, and people taking good stuff out of the genre they love and using it on both sides, right?
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
straight up crime people who are writing, who are really trying to have literary language. They're creeping into literary language, and I'm sure it's a lot of fun for them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it makes it a much more interesting time to be a writer, than it was even like
Yeah.
12 years ago, that that we can play with what used to be thought of as the province of genre and
Yeah,
still be taken seriously as literary writers, which is really nice. You know, you can actually have a
exactly.
plot now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a plot and we've got, yeah, I think it's healthy. It's sort of unhealthy for there would be all these little pioneer villages of this is sci-fi
Yeah.
and this is, and they don't cross over and you dare. And if you do, there's something wrong with you. It's just so much healthier
I agree.
and I'm old enough to remember when Canadians, there was some kind of thing about don't read American literature. To his credit,
It sounds so typical, but that's all right.
I know it does.
Yeah.
It does. It's like we will be so influenced by it that we'll lose our culture. And it's just plain not true.
Yeah.
And it's such a relief to just let those boundaries go and, benefit from all this, from the plenty that's out there for you. Right. So, yeah.
I'm hopping back in because Jill, we have a question
Okay.
from Nan G. She says, I loved Outlander as you were so descriptive about an amazing protagonist who traversed such a harsh and beautiful landscape.
Oh, thank you.
As a proud former Albertan, do you find that Alberta's incredible landscape influences your work?
That's a great question. Absolutely. I used to live in the area that I write about, not necessarily in the area where the Outlander is set, but I used to live in Banff, and so I have a physical sense of. I am a city slicker. I live in Toronto, and Toronto's a big city, but I have spent more than your average amount of time in Banff and in around the area. So I have this physical sense of what it's like to be there. And I have a sense of what it's like to be there kind of over the long haul, to sort of go from the holy cow, look at the mountains, to that being a normal part of your life and it's still there. It's still that awe, how to live an everyday life while being awed by your surroundings. And what a very small town is like that, when I was there a long time ago, there really was tourist season and they rolled up the sidewalks when tourist season was over. And that was weird being in a town where that drained of people. So it was, it really has influenced me. And I think it's part of what Emily and I were talking about. It's part of the pleasure of writing this book. So yeah, thank you so much. That is a very good question.
And it seems like we don't have any more. So if there's something we haven't talked about, or Emily, if you have a final, anything you'd like to add, please.
Well, I'd like to ask Jill, like, is there anything else that you'd
That we
like
could talk
to?
about?
Yeah. I've been so enjoying this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Would you mind if I asked you a question?
Sure.
And you just say no if you don't want to. Obviously, you too have had to do research for your books, and what's your feeling about how to get research into your book? Do you enjoy the research? Do you enjoy the writing? Do you not enjoy either of them? Do you only enjoy this part of it, or where's your happiness?
My happiness is in revisions. I do enjoy the research because you go down these rabbit holes and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, I go in and out of enjoyment with the first draft because, like you, I don't write from an outline, so there is a lot of time kind of flailing around trying to figure out
Yeah.
what the novel is, which I find often pretty disheartening. Those moments where you're like, "There's no way I can pull this all together. This is a mess." I have a lot of those. Probably especially because I don't write sequentially. I'm jumping all over the place and I'll figure out how it goes together later.
And also the architecture just of the Glass Hotel, the architecture of how you tell the story is it's incredibly smart, but I can see how juggling all those forward and backward and all the different characters. I'd freak out too.
Yeah, it was freaky. I restructured that book 3 times. And so I'm, the first round editorial notes were, could you please change everything? So I did. And, I just kept on changing everything until it more or less worked. But
well done.
Thank you. Thanks. But yeah, once you have concrete notes from editors, like that's the joy for me. Where it's like, oh, thank you so much for giving me a map. Let me fix all these problems and make it a better book.
Exactly. Such a pleasure to sit down with words from someone that this is going to be useful, and
Yeah.
not make everything more difficult. Yeah, you get excited about things, don't
Yeah.
you? Like, I can
Yeah.
work, I can do that. I know I can do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so concrete. It's really
Well,
nice.
I'm glad to hear you write a little bit like me. And I mean, do you know writers who really rely on an outline?
Yeah, my husband's a writer. He mostly does short fiction. And even for a short story, like he'll know exactly how it ends before he starts writing.
Oh
And
yeah.
I've definitely met other writers like that,
Yeah.
which I kind of get it. Do
Yeah.
you go on your road trip with a map or without one? Like it makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. Yeah, I don't know. I've always been afraid I'd get bored if I did that. Is that partly why you do it too?
Yeah, exactly. And well, I've heard a lot of poets do that, they hear or understand the first few stanzas, and they know how it's got to end. They know maybe only the last two lines or the last
Right.
stanza, and it's really a question of the joy for them, or the struggle is figuring out how to get through that blank.
That's
Right?
interesting. I kind of envy that. I never know how it's going to end.
No, but you probably know the gesture.
Yeah,
You know
at
the
a certain
gesture.
point, I do. When I start writing, I have no idea. But then
That's true.
there is a point, maybe like 100 pages from the end, where it's like, okay, I think, yeah, the gesture is a good way of putting that. I
I'm
like that.
pretty sure what I have to accomplish by the end, but do I have any idea how I'm going to manage that?
Yeah,
Nope.
yeah, exactly. So, are you working on a new novel?
I haven't been doing very much writing, but thank God. For some reason, I'm able to read these days, and that's always a sign, I find, of being ready to percolate, ready. I have ideas. And I keep saying, I don't know if you agree with this, but writers read the way athletes eat. We often have very odd reading habits because we
Right.
need to understand something. We need to be again, to sort of percolate these things. And so quite often you'll pick up a book and go, it's just like, no, this is not helping. And then you'll pick up a book and it's just like, bingo, that's what I need.
Yeah,
So I'm in that stage now, which is usually a very hopeful thing. So
right. That's really nice. Yeah, I was reading a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, which was
yeah,
purely a function of the beginning of the pandemic. We were all kind of in shock and the ambulance sirens were constant and I couldn't write, but I could read.
New
And
York, I know.
yeah, yeah, that's interesting. And
And then did you have a sort of a dry, there was a point at which I was surprised I wasn't reading. Like, all this time,
right.
and I can't narrow my focus. So
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to focus in this time, but I've been writing sci-fi, which I found to be the antidote to the current world. Maybe in
good,
the same way a Western is. It's like just transport
yeah,
me out of here.
yeah, get me out of here. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So I'm glad you're actually writing now.
I
Good.
have been. Yeah,
Oh, that's good news.
yeah. Well, thank you.
Here's a question for you.
Okay,
Do you have a title? Don't tell me the title, but do you have a title, or do you not have a title yet?
I have a title.
Good.
Yeah.
And do you have working titles that then change, or do you always have the title?
Some of them change like 5 times. Yeah, the working title will just keep on flipping to whatever I think is better. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm almost never happy with my titles. Like they're fine, but
Yeah,
you
I
know,
know. They're
like
hard.
they're really hard. There are some authors, like Nick Harkaway is one of my favorite contemporary novelists. His books are The Gone Away World, Angel Maker. He just has
Yeah.
the best titles at all times.
That's
Yeah.
exactly totally solid titles that you
Yeah,
go, oh, I wish I'd thought of that.
exactly. If I'd only thought of that first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you both so much. This was fascinating, and yay, genre and
Yeah.
literary interacting and getting along. And please buy Ridgerunner, buy the paperback edition of The Glass Hotel that comes out next week. Support these wonderful authors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Maris.